The cardboard box felt lighter than it should have. 12 years of dedication, late nights, and hard work condensed into a single container that barely filled my back seat. I did not slam the door on my way out of the building. I did not send a company-wide email venting my frustration. I did not even finish the coffee that had gone cold on my desk while I watched them move her things into my office. The inbox on my phone sat like a ticking bomb, but by the time I pulled into my driveway, I had already made my decision. I turned off notifications, every single one of them. This whole situation started because of one man's ego and his complete misunderstanding of how the systems he had been managing for 6 months actually worked. My name is Nicholas Vance, and until 3 days ago, I was the senior operations manager at Ross & Company, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Seattle. I had worked my way up from an entry-level coordinator position, and I had never forgotten what it felt like to be overlooked, to have ideas dismissed, to feel invisible. That foundation kept me grounded, kept me connected to every person on my team, regardless of their title. The decision to walk out was not impulsive. It was the only logical response to a situation that had become entirely untenable. Ross & Company specialized in supply chain consulting for mid-market retail companies. We help businesses optimize their vendor relationships, streamline their procurement processes, and negotiate better contracts. It was detailed work, relationship-heavy, and required an intricate understanding of not just logistics, but people. I had built the vendor management division from the ground up. When I started, we had 12 vendor relationships and processed maybe $2 million in annual contracts. By the time I left, we managed vendor relationships worth $46 million annually across 93 different partnerships. Every single one of those relationships had my fingerprints on it. The director who had handed my office to his assistant was named Gordon Finch, and he had been with the company for exactly 6 months. He came from a competitor, brought in to modernize operations and increase efficiency. What that really meant was cutting costs and making the numbers look better for the quarterly reports. Gordon had arrived with his own ideas about how things should run, most of them lifted from whatever business bestseller he had read on the plane. He liked phrases like leaning into synergy and optimizing human capital resources. He had never actually managed vendor relationships himself, but he had plenty of opinions about how I should be doing it. His assistant, the woman who now sat in my office, was named Chloe Briggs, 27 years old, fresh off an MBA program and absolutely convinced that her degree made her qualified to run operations she did not understand. She had ambition, which I could respect, but ambition without competence is just noise. The decision to move her into my office came during a restructuring meeting I was not invited to attend. I found out the same way I found out about most of Gordon's decisions, through a calendar invite. Office transition Nicholas Vance, scheduled for 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. When I showed up to my office that morning, Chloe was already there with a measuring tape, deciding where her desk should go. She did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Gordon did not tell you," she had said, smiling. "This is going to be so much more efficient. You will be moving to the shared workspace on the 3rd floor. More collaborative that way." The shared workspace was an open floor plan with no doors, where the junior associates sat in rows of desks like a call center. Every conversation was public, every phone call overheard, every vendor negotiation exposed to whoever was walking past. You cannot manage sensitive vendor relationships in a fishbowl. But Gordon did not know that, and Chloe did not care. I had nodded, walked to my desk, and began packing. Chloe kept talking, saying something about how this was a great opportunity for cross-pollination of ideas, but her words faded into white noise. I was too busy doing math in my head. 93 vendors, $46 million in annual contracts, hundreds of smaller decisions and relationships that kept everything running smoothly, and exactly 0 documentation that anyone else could follow. I had been planning to build out that knowledge base next quarter, but Gordon had cut the budget for it, calling it an unnecessary expense. The box filled slowly, a framed photo of my team from last year's holiday party, the coffee mug my vendors had sent me after we successfully navigated a supply crisis, my backup charging cables, the small succulent plant that had somehow survived my care for 3 years. Chloe eventually left, probably to report back to Gordon about how well I was taking it. Professional, compliant, quiet. That was always my reputation. Nicholas does not make waves. Nicholas gets it done. Nicholas is a team player. What they mistook for compliance was actually calculation. I knew the system could not run without the foundation I had built, and I knew Gordon and Chloe had no idea what that foundation actually comprised. I carried my box to the elevator, rode down to the garage, and drove away without looking back. The second day of my sudden retirement started with coffee and silence. I had driven to a small cafe across town, somewhere far from the downtown corridor where I might run into former colleagues grabbing their morning lattes. The barista did not know my order, and she did not know my name. The anonymity felt like cool water after years in a corporate desert. My phone sat on the table next to my personal laptop. I had finally turned it on this morning just to see the damage. The email count had climbed to 147. The text messages were worse. 17 from my former team members, 6 from vendors, 3 from Gordon himself. I opened none of them. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and started doing something I should have done years ago. I began documenting exactly what I had built. The vendor relationships were not just contracts and email chains. They were built on years of personal rapport, of understanding each company's internal politics, of knowing who the real decision-makers were behind the titles on the org chart. I knew which account manager at our largest supplier was going through a personal crisis and needed flexible meeting times. I knew which vendor principal was touchy about contract terminology after a bad lawsuit 3 years back. I knew who could expedite an order if we really needed it, and who needed a month's notice for anything outside standard parameters. This was not information that lived in our client relationship management system. It lived in my head, in my notes, in the relationships I had cultivated through hundreds of phone calls and dozens of in-person visits. And now it was living in a private document on my personal laptop, time-stamped and detailed. Not because I planned to use it against them, but because I wanted a record of what I had built before someone else tried to take credit for it, or before it all fell apart. The cafe was filling up with the late-morning crowd, freelancers with their laptops, retirees reading newspapers, and normal people doing normal things, unbothered by vendor contracts and corporate restructuring. My phone buzzed. A call this time, not a text. Gordon's name appeared on the screen. I watched it ring through to voicemail, took a sip of coffee, and watched a notification pop up. New voicemail. The temptation to listen was strong. What could he possibly have to say? An apology, an explanation, or a demand that I return and fix whatever was currently breaking? I deleted the voicemail without listening. I added Gordon's number to a special filter I had created. Emails and calls would technically come through, but I would never see the notifications. As far as I was concerned, he no longer existed in my world. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, the name made me pause. Megan Cole. Megan was one of my team leads, a sharp woman in her early 30s who had been with Ross and Company for 5 years. She had grown from a junior coordinator to managing her own subset of vendor relationships, and I had been mentoring her toward an eventual promotion. If anyone from the company deserved a response, it was Megan. I answered the call. Nicholas, thank God. Megan's voice carried a tension I had rarely heard in her voice. I know you are probably not supposed to talk to us, but it is absolute chaos here. Complete chaos. I asked her what was going on. Chloe locked herself out of the vendor management system, Megan explained. She apparently changed the master password yesterday because she wanted to establish new security protocols, and then she wrote it down wrong. IT has been trying to reset it all morning, but the backup authentication goes to your company email, which apparently you are not checking. I was not checking it because I had disabled the accounts on my phone, though I had set up an auto-forward to my personal email before I left. However, that only covered incoming messages, not system authentication security requests. IT can override it, I said calmly. They have administrative access. That is what we thought, Megan replied. But apparently you set up some kind of special security protocol last year after that data breach attempt. The IT director is saying they need your physical signature on an override authorization form, or they have to go through a 48-hour security review process before they can force a manual reset. I had set that up after someone tried to fish their way into our vendor database. I had worked with IT to implement a multi-layer security system that required senior manager approval for any administrative overrides. It had seemed like a good idea at the time, and now it was proving to be an insurmountable obstacle. "I cannot help with that, Megan," I said. "I do not work there anymore." "You were not fired, though, right?" "Gordon said you were transitioning to a new role." "Gordon can characterize it however he wants," I said. I packed my things and left. "I am not coming back." There was silence on the other end. Then Megan spoke quietly. "We have vendor calls scheduled this afternoon, major renewals. Chloe was supposed to prep for them, but she cannot access any of the account histories or contract notes. She is asking us for information. But, honestly, Nicholas, most of us do not know the details on the high-level accounts. That was always your territory." "Then I suggest Chloe figure it out," I replied. "She has my office now. She has my title. She clearly does not need my help." I hung up the phone, feeling a complicated mixture of satisfaction and concern for my team, but determined to stand my ground. By day 3, the email count had reached 214. Every single one was marked urgent, the digital equivalent of someone screaming into a void. I spent the morning at a local park, walking the trails with my phone on silent in my pocket. The weather was cooperating, one of those rare Seattle mornings where the sky was actually blue and the air smelled of pine. Runners passed by with their earbuds in, and dog walkers nodded in greeting. Nobody knew my name or my job title, or the small act of rebellion I was currently engaged in. When I finally sat down on a bench overlooking the water, I allowed myself to open the email app, not to respond, just to observe. The subject lines told the story of a company in freefall. "Urgent vendor call today. Need background. Contract renewal. Immediate response needed. Summit Enterprises escalated. Where are the quarterly vendor reports? Chloe Briggs needs assistance priority." And my personal favorite from Gordon Finch himself, "Professional courtesy response required." Professional courtesy. The phrase sat in my chest like a heavy stone. Where was the professional courtesy when he moved me to a shared workspace without a single discussion? Where was the professional courtesy when he promoted his assistant into my role without even pretending to consider my qualifications? I scrolled further down the list. The vendors had started reaching out to me directly, confused about why their usual contact person was not responding. These messages carried a different tone, concerned rather than demanding, personal rather than corporate. They wanted to know if everything was okay, and why this new person named Chloe was asking for information they had already provided to me weeks ago. These messages made me feel a sense of guilt. These were relationships I had built, partnerships I valued, but they were also partnerships with Ross and Company, not with me personally. If I responded now, I would be doing Gordon's job for him. I would be proving that he could push me aside and still benefit from my labor. A text message interrupted my scrolling. It was from Audrey Grant, the Director of Operations at Summit Enterprises, our third largest vendor relationship. They represented a $12 million annual contract that was up for renewal in 6 weeks. I had been working with Audrey for 8 years, since before she got her director title. We had a mutual respect built on years of actually delivering what we promised. "Nicholas, off the record, what the hell is happening over there?" Her message read, "This Chloe person does not seem to know anything about our partnership history. She asked me to send over our company requirements like we are a new vendor." I stared at the question for a long moment. I started typing a response, then stopped, then started again. "Hi, Audrey," I wrote. "I have actually transitioned out of my role at Ross and Company. Chloe Briggs is your new point of contact. I am sure she will get up to speed quickly." The reply came back in under a minute, transitioned or pushed out. "Because if Ross and Company cannot maintain the relationship standards you set, we will find someone who can. Our renewal is not mandatory." I did not reply further. I had given her the information she needed to draw her own conclusions. My phone rang again shortly after. This time, it was Diana Foster, a vice president at Vanguard Advisory. Vanguard was Ross and Company's biggest competitor, a larger and more prestigious firm with a significant market share. "Nicholas," Diana said when I answered. I heard through the grapevine that you might be available for new opportunities. We have been trying to expand our vendor management division for 2 years. We have the clients and the demand, but we do not have someone with your expertise to build the infrastructure. I asked her what they were offering. We are looking at a vice president's position, she said. Base salary of $230,000, which I believe is approximately 40% higher than your current compensation. There would also be performance bonuses structured around successful partnerships and a 2% equity stake in the company vesting over 4 years. You would have the authority to hire your own team and set your own processes. Diana explained that Vanguard Advisory was expanding rapidly across 3 different offices in major hubs, managing over $400 million in client portfolios. She assured me that I would have the resources and institutional backing to execute my vision without the political headaches. It was an incredibly compelling offer. It represented the exact level of professional respect and authority I had been fighting for at Ross & Company. More importantly, it offered equity, a stake in what I would be building. I told Diana that I needed some time to think about it and that I had a call scheduled with Julian Ross, the founder and CEO of Ross & Company. She understood and said the offer would remain open for a week. I hung up the phone, realizing the power dynamic had completely shifted. I was no longer an employee begging for a desk. I was the key to a $46 million division, and the competition was willing to pay handsomely for my expertise. The situation took a dramatic turn on the 4th day. Megan Cole called me in a panic, her voice trembling over the line. "Nicholas, you will not believe what they did," she said. Gordon and Chloe were so desperate to get into the database before the afternoon Summit Enterprises meeting that they forged your signature on a physical IT override form. They scanned it and uploaded it to the server to bypass the security block. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, followed quickly by a surge of anger. "They did what?" I asked. "They forged your signature," Megan repeated, "but it backfired completely. The digital signature validation system you set up last year flagged it immediately because the metadata did not match your digital token, and the system automatically sent a fraud alert to the IT director, Harvey Jenkins and Julian Ross himself. IT has locked down the entire server, and Julian is absolutely furious. They are calling it a major security breach and a legal liability." I knew the legal implications immediately. Under California Penal Code, Section 470, signing someone else's name without authority to commit fraud is a felony forgery. Furthermore, as corporate officers, Gordon's actions constituted a severe breach of fiduciary duty to Ross & Company. He had actively compromised the company's internal security protocols and exposed the firm to massive legal liability, all to cover up his own incompetence. I told Megan to stay calm and document everything she witnessed. I knew Harvey Jenkins would have the system's log showing exactly who uploaded the scanned document and from which IP address, meaning Gordon and Chloe had left a permanent digital paper trail of their crime. Less than 10 minutes after I hung up with Megan, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Julian Ross, the founder and CEO. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, his voice tense and exhausted. "I apologize for the direct call, but we have a critical situation here. I need to know if you signed a security override form yesterday afternoon." "I did not, Julian," I said calmly. "I have not signed any documents for Ross & Company since I packed my office last Thursday." Julian let out a long breath. "I see," he said. "That confirms what ID is telling me. We have a serious problem. Gordon and Chloe Briggs have committed a major breach of protocol. I want to apologize to you personally for how your transition was handled. Gordon's decisions do not reflect how I want this company run. I have been reviewing the operations of the vendor division, and it is clear to me that your absence has caused significant disruption. Our vendors are calling, and we are facing a potential crisis with Summit Enterprises. I want you to return to Ross & Company. I am prepared to offer you the position of Vice President of Vendor Relations with a base salary of $210,000, direct reporting to me, and the return of your office." I listened to his offer, but I was no longer the same manager who had walked out a week ago. "Julian," I said, "I appreciate the apology and the offer, but we need to discuss the legal reality of what has occurred. Gordon Finch and Chloe Briggs forged my signature on a corporate security document. That is a violation of California Penal Code Section 470. It is a felony. Furthermore, Gordon has breached his fiduciary duty to the company by exposing your database to potential security risks and violating internal protocols. This is not just a misunderstanding, it is a crime. If I return, it cannot be to work under or alongside someone who has committed forgery to cover their mistakes. I need a written commitment that Gordon Finch will be terminated immediately for cause, and that Chloe Briggs will be removed from the division. I also need to know that I will have full administrative authority over the operations database without interference. Julian was silent for a moment. This is a very serious accusation, Nicholas, he said. We have the evidence, Julian, I replied. The IT system logged the forged upload, and Megan Cole can confirm the timeline. I also have a standing offer from Vanguard Advisory for a vice president position with higher compensation and equity. I do not need to return to Ross & Company. If I do, it will be on my terms with the guarantee that the leadership is held to ethical and legal standards. Julian sighed. Give me 24 hours, he said. I need to consult with our legal counsel and review the IT logs. I agreed, telling him that I would make my final decision after receiving his written response. I hung up the phone, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the rules of the game had changed entirely. My silence had not been weakness. It had been the space they needed to destroy themselves. I knew Julian Ross was a pragmatic man, and when faced with the choice between protecting a failing director and saving a $46 million division, he would choose the money and the law every single time. The resolution came faster than I expected. The following morning, Julian Ross sent a formal email containing a draft agreement that addressed every single one of my conditions. Gordon Finch was terminated for cause, effective immediately, citing the breach of fiduciary duty and the forgery of corporate documents. The company's legal counsel had advised Julian that keeping Gordon on staff after the IT log confirmed the forgery under California Penal Code. Section 470 was an unacceptable risk that could expose the company to shareholder lawsuits and vendor litigation. Chloe Briggs was removed from the operations division and reassigned to a junior client relations role, where her access to sensitive databases was permanently revoked. I was offered the position of Vice President of Vendor Relations and Operations, reporting directly to the CEO, with a base salary of $210,000, full hiring authority, and a written agreement that my non-compete clause would be voided if I chose to leave after 1 year. This last condition was my insurance policy, ensuring that I would never be trapped in a toxic structure again. I walked back into Ross & Company on Monday morning. The atmosphere on the executive floor was quiet, almost reverent. The staff knew that a major shift had occurred, and the sight of my office being restored to its original state was a clear signal of who had won the conflict. My succulent plant was back on the windowsill. The team photo was on the shelf, and my cold coffee cup had been replaced with a fresh mug. Megan Cole met me in the lobby, her face glowing with relief. When she saw me walk in, she smiled and gave me a brief professional hug. "Welcome back, Nicholas," she said, handing me a fresh cup of coffee. "We did it." "We did," I replied. "Now, let us get to work and clean up this mess." I immediately called a team meeting for 9 o'clock. Looking at the 10 faces around the table, I could see the relief. I told them that the security issues were resolved, the database was fully unlocked, and that we would be restructuring the division to prevent single points of failure. The first week was a whirlwind of damage control. I contacted every vendor personally, beginning with Audrey Grant at Summit Enterprises. I apologized for the disruption and assured her that the security issues had been resolved and the leadership team reorganized. Audrey was impressed by the transparencies and the swift action. The $12 million contract was not only renewed, but expanded to include additional supply chain services, bringing the annual value to $15 million. Next, I reached out to Donald Wright, the operations lead at Pinnacle Distributors, who managed our $5 million shipping contract. He had been furious when Chloe Briggs ignored his emails regarding container delivery delays. I spent an hour on the phone with Donald, explaining the leadership change and presenting a new tracking system I had designed. By the end of the call, he was laughing, stating he was glad to have a professional back in charge. He signed our contract renewal early. Over the next 3 months, we stabilized the division. I hired 2 experienced managers to support the team, and we implemented a comprehensive documentation and training system. I wanted to ensure that the division was no longer dependent on a single person's memory, including my own. We built a secure, multi-layer database architecture with proper access controls, ensuring that another password lockout or security breach would be impossible. Our vendor retention rate climbed by 25% compared to the previous year, and we added 7 new partnerships through direct referrals. The metrics were undeniable, and Julian Ross noticed. During our first quarterly review, Julian handed me a report showing that our division's efficiency had reached an all-time high. "You were right about the value of these relationships, Nicholas," Julian said. "I made a mistake in bringing Gordon in, and I appreciate your willingness to return and rebuild. We are a stronger company because of it." 1 year after I walked out of the office with a cardboard box, Julian called me in for another meeting. He offered me the position of Chief Operating Officer starting the following month. The promotion would allow me to elevate Megan Cole to the Vice President role, completing the succession plan I had built. When I told Megan the news, she was overwhelmed with gratitude, thanking me for believing in her and mentoring her through the chaos. I accepted the COO offer. Reflecting on the long road that had led to this moment, the cardboard box that had once felt so light had become the foundation of a new career. I had returned to Ross & Company on my own terms, not as a victim of restructuring, but as the architect of its recovery. The best revenge was not a dramatic confrontation, but building something so indisputably valuable that trying to replace you became the lesson they would never forget. The people who underestimate you are simply giving you the freedom to prove them wrong on your own terms, and I had done exactly that.